Alrighty, well, I was just thinking of something this morning, and I think that there's some parallels I can draw here between what I was thinking of in modern society. I'll tell you what it is, and you can draw your own conclusions anyway. Maybe I'm crazy, who knows. But years ago, there was a television program, and it was actually one of my favorite television programs of all time. It ran from 1978 to, I believe, 1982. And it was a program called WKRP in Cincinnati. And it was about a radio station in Cincinnati and all the people that worked there and stuff. And there were quite a few oddball characters. There were quite a few characters there that really couldn't have worked anywhere else. They wouldn't have lasted, because they were incompetent and stuff. The general manager of the station was a man by the name of Arthur Carlson. And Arthur Carlson, the only reason that he really ever lasted as a general manager of the radio station is because his mother owned the radio station. He was a really good guy, good-hearted guy and stuff. The character this fella played, he was played by Gordon Jump. Long gone now. Gordon Jump's passed away many years ago. But anyway, very talented actor, Gordon Jump. But anyway, Arthur Carlson, the character played by Gordon Jump, very good-hearted fellow, but he was like a man-child, really. He'd be in his office playing with toys and things like that, And he used to have his receptionist, Jennifer, who was actually one of the few truly competent employees of the radio station. She would prevent people from going in to see him because he didn't want to be bothered where he was playing with his toys and stuff like that, Anyway, there was him. There were different characters anyway. They were all pretty funny. But there was one character there called Herb Tarlick, and Herb Tarlick was the manager of sales for the radio station. He was their salesman. He sold commercials and so on the station, handled commercial promotions and things like that. And Herb Tarlick was a jackass. And back then, every situation comedy had a jackass. There always had to be a jackass type character. A lovable jackass. Every situation comedy had one, and with WKRP in Cincinnati, Herb Tarlick was the lovable jackass. Now I come to the character who reminds me of modern society. And he was a fellow by the name of Les Nessman. And that was the character. I'm trying to think now. I can't remember who the actor was, what his name was. I can picture him I can picture him in my mind, but I can't recall his real name. But the character played by this fellow was a fellow by the name of Les Nessman. Again, very good actor. Really an excellent actor, But he played this character, Les Nessman. And Les Nessman was the general manager of news for WKRP in Cincinnati. And Les Nessman was terribly incompetent. I mean, he would mispronounce words. He would refer to the tennis player Chichi Rodriguez as Chai Chai Rodriguez, just to give you an idea. That's what he was like. He was completely incompetent. He was obsessed for some reason with farm animals, especially hogs. And so here he'd be in a radio station in an urban area, and he'd have to do his hog report every day, where he would talk about, the prices of pork and things like that, which would interest hog farmers, but there were no hog farmers in the metropolitan area, so it's kind of silly anyway. But anyway, he was not very professional. But in his mind, he was 60 Minutes quality professional. Now, the only reason he was kept around there and employed by the radio station is because the management had a soft spot for him, because he was a really nice person. He was a good-hearted person. He was a sincere person, and he tried to do right, But, he used to screw up monumentally a lot. He wouldn't check sources before he'd put news out there, and then he'd end up, broadcasting things that weren't true. Get the radio station into a lot of trouble. He mispronounced words, like I said. He used to screw up in a variety of ways, and it actually was hilarious, And he had an inflated sense of who he was and of his own competence. And people kind of went along with him just because they loved him and they didn't want to break his heart by telling him the truth. And one of the things, anyway, with Les Nessman was, because he was the director of news, he felt that he should have an office with walls. As it stands, he had in the big open office area where there were a bunch of desks where Herb Tarlick sat and where another character by the name of Bailey Quarters sat. She was another employee of the radio station, and so on. Les had a corner of that area which was for him. That was his little area where he kept his desk and his filing cabinet and his coat rack and his teletype machine and so on. But it was open. There were no walls, and he felt like he should have walls. So what he did is he put wide masking tape on the floor. He made a perimeter where he felt like walls would be if he had a proper office with walls. And he had one open area, which is where the door would be. And everybody was expected to respect that. And those were supposedly his walls. And so that he could pretend that he had an office. And, a proper office with walls, which he felt that a reporter of his caliber deserved. Because, of course, he had a very inflated idea of what caliber a reporter he was. Anyway, he'd come in the morning, and he'd take out a key, and he'd stick it into an imaginary lock and the imaginary door, and he'd go through the motions. He'd basically mime the motion of unlocking the door, turning the knob and opening the door and stuff. If anybody wanted to talk to him when he was at his desk, they'd be required to approach the open area of the tape, and they would, knock. They'd take their fist, they'd knock on the imaginary door, and they'd wait for him to say to come in, and then they'd turn the doorknob, the imaginary knob, reach out, turn that, push the imaginary door open, step through into the office, and then he'd be sitting at his desk. He'd say, close my door, please. And so they'd turn around, they'd push the door closed, the imaginary door, and all that, and everyone was expected to respect that, and if somebody came into the office and they didn't respect it, or they just weren't aware of it, or whatever, well, they get a lot of disapproving looks, and they get scolded by the others in the office for not, basically for not respecting the delusion, for not going along with Les Nessman's delusion that he had walls. Anyway, Herb Tarlick, being a jackass, he oftentimes would forget, or just even on purpose, he'd disrespect the walls, and he'd try walking across where the tape was, where the solid line of tape was, and he'd get disapproving looks, and he'd get scolded and everything for doing that, But anyway, that reminds me a lot of modern society. How we're all required now to go along with delusional things. We're all required now to pretend that things are true that are not true. And I think y'all know what I'm talking about. But anyway, there are certain things being pushed now in modern society. And if you don't go along, well, you may lose your employment, you may be booted out of school, you may be deplatformed. I mean, I'm on YouTube here. I could lose my channel for talking like this. And this is what they do. They silence you, they fire you, they cancel you if you don't go along with the delusion. It's a collective delusion, and everyone's required to go along with it. Even if you don't really believe it, you're required to pay lip service to it. So like with Herb Tarlick, he knew there were no walls there, but he was still required to respect the delusion in order to remain a member of the group in good standing. And whenever he didn't respect the delusion for whatever reason, he he paid a kind of a price for that, because he got scolded and he got disapproving looks and stuff. And in the end, he'd always give in, and he'd back up and go to where the opening was for the door, and he'd go for the motion of knocking. He'd be rolling his eyes while he was doing it, but he'd do it, you know. Anyway, here's the thing. You know, what we got now in society is we got a collective delusion. Now, Les Nessman's tape for walls thing, that really didn't hurt anybody, you know. But what's happening now is hurting people. It's a delusional thing. Society is in a delusional state, and that makes for an unhealthy society. And that's what's happening. Is it's a very unhealthy thing. It's got people questioning who they are and who others are and who they are in relation to others and who others are in relation to them. It's causing a rift between people where there wouldn't be a rift otherwise. You know, the fact that we're even talking about this stuff as seriously as we are, the fact that we're actually talking about men menstruating and having babies and stuff like that, you know, no, you know, that's not a thing. And anyway, I'll just leave it there. But I was just thinking of that a little while ago, and what we've got in modern society, what we're dealing with right now, it's sort of like that TV show with Les Nessman's Imaginary Walls, and everybody went along with the delusion and pretended that there were walls there. The only difference is that was harmless, you know, and they went along with it just out of respect for Les, because they loved Les. Even though he was incompetent, he was still a genuinely good person, and that was recognized, and so they went along with it for that reason. But, I mean, what's happening now, it's unhealthy, and there are people behind it who don't mean us well. There are people behind it who mean to harm us. And by going along with these delusions, we're assisting them in the harming of us collectively as a society. And so we need to not do that, you know. Anyway, that's it. That's all I have to say about it. If you get a chance, watch some old episodes of WKRP in Cincinnati. If you never saw the program before, look it up here and watch it. I think you'll like it. Try to find versions of it that haven't been altered for copyright reasons, because some of them, they sped the thing up a bit so the people sound like chipmunks when they're talking, or they have a tiny little picture you can barely see, or find some episodes that are as they were in their original form and watch them. I think you'll really enjoy it. If you haven't seen the show before, I think you'll really like it. And if you have seen it before, well, it'll bring back some memories for you anyway. That's it. Different times we lived in back then, I suppose. A lot of the things that were jokes back then are reality now. It's got to make you think. Talk to you all later.